What is up, everyone? I am Charlie Shrem, and you're listening and watching another epic episode of Untold Stories, where together, twice a week, we get to dive deep with some of crypto's most influential leaders to truly understand how this movement came to be, where we are right now in this moment, and oh boy, everyone kind of wants to know what's going on right now, and where we're going in the future, and how we're going to get there. I just got back from Austin, Texas at Consensus 2022. And man, it was hot. Actually, I was reminiscing with the creators of Consensus, CoinDesk, that I think the 2017 bull market, I remember like landing in New York at that Consensus for 2018, 2017. I remember landing and the price was like finally turning around. Everyone at that point was so used to this bear market that we were in for a year or so, that at that point there had been so many false starts that no one believed it, but it felt like something was changing. So I will say that a lot of people are looking at charts and all these different like levels. At the end of the day, Bitcoin and crypto is a little over 10 years old. It's very new. It's impossible to predict what's going to be other than based on feelings and from those people who have been there before in the past. Other than that, charters, influencers, things like that, especially the ones who this is their first bull and bear market, be careful, because it's very easy to get wrecked. A lot of people have gotten wrecked. If you had been listening to this show and following me and the projects and the people that we've had on the show, you hopefully avoided getting wrecked and are in a good place. But now more than ever, you will see a proliferation of a lot more scams and things like that. So just want to look out. We're in some crazy days. These are where the opportunities are. Not to say that you catch the falling knife or things are going to change really quickly, but you'll know that in a year or two or three from now, when we've all made our fortunes, again, for some of us, because we all lost a little bit of it during this time around, but when we make our fortunes in a few years, we're going to look back during this year, during these months now, and saying, I wish I bought more of this. I wish I got involved. I wish I worked for this company. It's impossible to predict it when it's happened. It's always hindsight. It's always in the past. But those situations will come back. So Consensus was really great. Obviously, Terra and Luna was on everyone's mind. This was like the day before Celsius had paused withdrawals. So a lot of people were worried about what was Celsius going to do. Everyone at that point was removing their money from Celsius. A lot of people were talking about it, but it wasn't a like muted atmosphere per se. It was very cultural, a lot of fun, a lot of people just kind of building and having a good time talking about. I saw people building things like decentralized email on top of Bitcoin and crypto. I saw people building some really, really brilliant things. And what they did was, I saw a huge pivot of companies building products on top of our infrastructure, but for the masses. If you notice, a lot of companies that were built and that got very successful, especially like in DeFi lending and stuff like that over the last year or two, were like crypto companies servicing crypto companies, not crypto companies building for the outside world. We have to prove utility now. We have to prove that this technology can actually change the world, not just promise that. We have to launch companies that'll do that. So I will say that it's great to launch companies to service others, but it's also important to build companies and build products to prove why we're here. So I had an amazing time doing a panel at Consensus, and we were able to record it, video and audio. I'm excited to bring it to you guys in a few minutes. What a treat this panel was. I just want to introduce some of the folks who are on this panel. This was a Bitcoin 10 years later. The 10-year anniversary actually of the founding of the Bitcoin Foundation was on that day. So we had myself, Jered Kenna, who was the founder of the first Bitcoin exchange after Mt. Gox called Tradehill. Actually, Tradehill was my company, BitInstant, which launched in 2011. Tradehill was one of our liquidity providers because back then, the only two places to buy Bitcoin in large amounts were Mt. Gox or Tradehill. You'd have to wire money to their personal bank accounts, and you'd have a credit there, and then you could use this like very, very crappy exchange. But when BitInstant launched and we had people wanted to buy retail, like how most people buy Bitcoin today or crypto today, is you go and you buy it on Coinbase or Voyager or one of your apps. You don't go on an exchange and place like an order or limit or market order. Those were the only ways. So BitInstant was the first retail exchange. Who else? Jonathan Mohan. What a treat this panel was. Jonathan Mohan arguably founded, now he works for DLTx, which is a publicly traded Bitcoin mining firm, but he founded Satoshi Square, which was a huge meetup in New York City that was launched in 2012, which was a way to get all people together to trade Bitcoin. Because at the time, people were getting worried about trading Bitcoin with each other locally or on the internet. So we figured, let's all meet at a public park once a day, and there'll be a person kind of being like an auctioneer. And he created that, and Satoshi Square ended up being the top, like first meetup groups before meetup.com was even a thing. And then Adam B. Levine moderated it. Now, let me tell you about Adam. Adam basically launched the first Bitcoin podcast called Let's Talk Bitcoin. He worked on Bitcoin Magazine, which was where Vitalik actually worked. Vitalik worked at Bitcoin Magazine writing before he went on to found Ethereum. But Let's Talk Bitcoin was the famous roundtable show with him, Dr. Stephanie Murphy, and Andreas Antonopoulos. And as everyone knows, Andreas ended up becoming one of the best, teachers. He's wrote so many books, and in this moment, he's probably in somewhere far-flung place in the world educating people about Bitcoin. How many videos have we watched or listened to Andreas? He's invited to Joe Rogan probably once every 6 months because of it. But Andreas was the other person on Let's Talk Bitcoin, my inspiration for launching this podcast. But Let's Talk Bitcoin is still running. You can still go listen to their episodes. Such a beautiful thing. And we just riffed. We had a good time on this panel. We told stories. We laughed. Jered makes tonic water. Now he exports tonic water with his amazing girlfriend in Colombia. And on stage, he actually handed me some tonic water. There may or may not have been some vodka in there. I don't know. But it certainly felt like it because we were starting to have a really good time. But enjoy the panel, guys. It's 30 minutes long. You're going to love it. And I'll see you in a few days.
Please welcome the panelist for 10 years later. Bitcoin's commercial beginnings from those who were there.
Well, thanks everybody for joining us today. This is 10 years later, Bitcoin's commercial beginnings from those who were there, and we were in fact all there. My name is Adam B. Levine. In 2013, I started my 5th Bitcoin podcast, and it was the first one that took off and was in the right place, right time. And it put me in a really interesting seat over the course of about 18 months to be sort of the platform on which, first as a podcast and then as a publishing platform, that really introduced a lot of the ideas and a lot of sort of the concepts that have become popularized over the last, at this point, half dozen years. So today we have a really great panel of people who I really like and I'm very happy to be talking with. Over here we have Jered Kenna, who was the original founder of Tradehill. You're the founder, right? Yeah, founder of Tradehill, which has very interesting stories behind it. Of course, Charlie Shrem from BitInstant and many other ventures. And then Jonathan Mohan, the original creator of the New York Bitcoin meetup.
Satoshi
who ran
Square.
That for a long time, Satoshi Square, and a lot of other kind of very early infrastructure projects along that side. But outside of even the projects that Jonathan was involved in, Jonathan knew everybody and everything that was happening in New York. And so he's very eminently qualified to be sitting right here. So just to kind of kick it off, folks, I gave very brief intros of you. Kind of talk to us, let's play the classic Bitcoin game. Talk very briefly about your rabbit hole story, just specifically in the context of when did you hear about it first, kind of what was the timing around that, and then what was kind of the moment where you switched from, oh, I heard about it, to I'm in it. And Jonathan, let's start with you.
Actually, I guess it's a good lead-in because I remember watching Charlie give a talk on Only One TV.
Oh my God, Bruce Wagner, yeah.
With Bruce Wagner.
Oh my God.
So Only One TV was the very first, one of the very first Bitcoin media sources, right? And it had the distinction of being video very early on at a time when that was not a common thing at all. Again, I was doing podcasts and these guys were doing daily video almost every single day. They put on the first Bitcoin conference and then resigned and disappeared in disgrace after having pushed in many people into this web wallet that then was either compromised or had a rug pull exit scam on it, and that saw many early sort of Bitcoin holders lose pretty much everything. And then there were also some other sketchier accusations.
It was only 250,000 Bitcoin.
Well, it was only 250,000 Bitcoin, which again,
Bitcoin,
at the time was not that much. I
still have
was a lot of
Bitcoin in
Bitcoin,
there.
but not that much in terms of dollars compared to what we're talking about today.
And so the people who orange pilled me was Free Talk Live and Charlie on Only One TV.
And then what was kind of the thinking when you started the Bitcoin meetup in New York?
Well, it was just I needed a co-founder and I couldn't find anyone, and so I started a Bitcoin meetup so that I could find a co-founder for my startup. But in March 13th, it got named Money Transmission, and I said, you can't start a bank in your parents' basement, you go to jail, and so I put that on pause.
Yeah, you would.
Okay. So this is an excellent lead-in, I suppose, to Charlie. Charlie, talk to us about your story.
Probably one of the first physical people that I actually spoke on the phone with about anything Bitcoin related was this guy over here, Jered, back in 2011. But because Bitcoin back then really just existed on IRC, which was like the Bitcoin chat room at the time, and it was like forums.bitcoin.org. And then, there wasn't even a Reddit yet. It was just those two places. And this guy over here there was Mt. Gox and Tradehill, and no one wanted to go trade on Mt. Gox because you'd have to wire money to this guy's personal bank account in Japan to buy Bitcoin. And this was the only place. So Jered started Tradehill, and his accounts were getting shut down all the time, which is what would happen back then. Back then, anyone who ran a Bitcoin company would have to have their like incorporation paperwork in their back pocket running from bank to bank as you get shut down. But we met and everything. But the first time that I ever felt that I was in it, because that's a great question, was I remember just being on the Bitcoin forums, and it was May 2011, and the guy who ended up becoming my business partner, because I should have done like what you did, but I meet my business partners on the internet. And we 3 years later ran that successful company, never met. We never spent more than 15 minutes on the phone together. But he was just like, yeah, I have this idea to make Bitcoin transactions faster, and I need $10,000 to start it. And I was the first person to respond on the forum post. I said, I'm in, let's go.
Yeah, seed rounds got bigger.
That was the seed round, $10,000.
And at the time, it was a lot of money, too.
Oh, this is amazing.
Okay, so Jered, tell your story and then also explain why you're pouring cups here.
Well, so I started the first Bitcoin exchange in the United States. It was the second in the world. I got in early 2010, or late 2009, right in there. And there was only one exchange in the world. It sucked, it was terrible, and it sucked until it died. And I said, how can we have this decentralized currency where you have like one entry and exit point? And of course, you could, if you found somebody that wanted to take dollars, you could do that.
But like local Bitcoins
right,
stuff.
Well, that didn't really exist.
Before the local Bitcoins, yeah.
Right, so we launched, I want to say on June 12th, 2011, which was coincidentally the same day that Chuck Schumer came out and said Bitcoin's only good for money laundering, drugs, terrorism, and maybe child porn, and which was like the best marketing we could ever have. And but not for the banks, but for getting the word out.
Well, I mean, if it makes all of this stuff possible, then imagine the good things that it makes possible too.
That led to that Gawker article in 2011. That led to a lot of people getting into Bitcoin. It was like a Silk Road related article.
Yeah.
So basically, ran that for a while. Started the San Francisco Bitcoin meetup. I guess I took it over after the first day. We had 12 people in there, and so I had a 41-bedroom place in the Mission District in San Francisco. It turned that into like a crypto Bitcoin hacker house. So, like the Rise and Bitcoin, filmed a bunch of stuff there, and it was this old crack house, but it had this crazy crypto history. Like Ripple came together there. I was the fourth person in Ripple, so I had known Jed and Arthur and David prior, and then I knew Chris Larson. So I pitched Chris Larson on Ripple, which sounds weird.
For better or worse.
I didn't hodl, unfortunately. Let's not get into that. And then, so Ripple started there as well, and a whole bunch of other cool projects. There's a lot of guys that are...
Oh yeah, Kraken, Jesse from Kraken used to hang out there all the time.
Vitalik used to crash in Vitalik.
Yeah, Trace Mayer too was there all the time. Stayed with me over there, yeah. Who else? Like everyone came through 20 mission.
It was a small world,
Yeah.
back in those days. Again, like it was very possible to know about pretty much every project that was going on and every person who was kind of meaningful within the space and doing something interesting.
Yeah.
And that was pretty much over by about 2014, you think?
Yeah, that's about when it changed.
I remember in 2013 on Christmas Eve, someone had sent me that someone wrote a new Bitcoin technical paper, and I opened the link to a Google Doc, and I saw it was you, me, Gavin Andreessen, and a bunch of other people, and I felt so honored that all of us were wasting our New Year's Eve reading a Bitcoin white paper.
So you asked about the beverage. So now I own a brewery in Medellin, Colombia, and we export tonic. So
Very good.
you were there when I started the Bitcoin exchange, so we got approval for exporting tonic last week. So I figured I'd pour you one on the...
Cheers.
Right on. All right, cool. So again, let's continue this sort of reminiscence about the old days. Again, from your experience, again, contrasting against the way that things are today, what was it like to actually be part of that? And Charlie, I want to start with you for this one. What was it like to be, you had kind of one of the more interesting entrepreneurial stories. And that story was audacious, and I remember you had run-ins with the Winklevoss twins that were utterly crazy. And again, how old were you when this was happening too?
I was probably, when I first got into Bitcoin, I was probably turning 20 years old. And I just always grew up with the belief that if you really believe in something and you really, really think it's, just go and really do it and don't really let anyone stand in your way. And for some reason, I knew Bitcoin was going to be so great and the future, and this was going to really take over everything, but I didn't know why. I just had, I think all of us had this kind of feeling that this thing was going to be successful in the future and it was going to amount to something, but none of us knew why, and it was really just more and enjoyable in the process. I grew up in a very religious Jewish community. I didn't have friends that wanted to be just my friends for me, not part of the community. So here I'm in this Bitcoin world filled of geeks and misfits and more. I got to Bitcoin to find friends. That's literally why I got into Bitcoin. I like hanging out in the IRC chat rooms. I like talking to all the people, understanding why everyone was there in the first place, how it came to be. I remember my parents never wanted me to move out of my house and get my own place. So I would have to fly and live on Jered's floor while I was running BitInstant. Yeah, those were, but everyone was very accessible too. You can get in touch with everyone and everyone kind of worked together. And there was no, 2014 changed this, but competition didn't really exist.
Yeah.
Do you remember when we went to Brian Armstrong's barbecue, Coinbase barbecue? And he wasn't even starting Coinbase yet. Here he was just working at Airbnb, and he wanted to basically take all of our ideas. Roger Ver was there, a bunch of other people. Tony Galippi was there from BitPay, and Coinbase ended up being, but there was we never thought that anyone would want to compete. It was hey, why don't we grow the pie instead of fighting over the small pie that was there?
But that was when it changed.
That's when it
changed.
That
barbecue was the shit.
that barbecue.
It's all Brian Armstrong's fault all along. Well, the wrong choice of meat.
If it wasn't for Coinbase, none of us would be here today too. It ended up being a mega. They paved the way they dealt with a lot of the regulations that none of us had to deal with anymore.
It was a natural evolution that was bound to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree with that as well. Again, you look at it's interesting, right? Because the incumbents, which I would argue Coinbase is at this point, always get all of the negative attention, right? And a lot of times it's totally justified, and a lot of times it's just because everybody wants to be that guy, right? But ultimately, again, that's kind of where it grew from this very early. One more kind of follow up on this, Charlie. One of the things that characterized the very early Bitcoin community to me was that almost nobody used their real name. It was almost entirely pseudonymous.
I was Yankee.
Yeah, exactly. You were Yankee. Again, I was Mind to Matter in those worlds. And this is that. So the fact that you were already connecting with Jered at that point is kind of actually interesting to me, because that was not, I think, a very common thing.
You had your real name, or it was just Tradehill was your forum post?
I had two accounts, but I remember in sometime early 2011, I think there was a push for people to use their real names.
I remember this. Something happened,
And then it was really funny. It was just somebody was like, if they want us to take us seriously, you can't be big badass miner 279. Or whatever,
right, exactly.
Or Pirate 40 or whatever.
Well,
right.
He did all
well, I mean, you could. Pirate 40 lasted about a year, right?
Yeah.
Lasted about a year. It was a very obvious Bitcoin Ponzi scheme.
He called it a Ponzi scheme. He's like,
people
join my
were
Ponzi.
super excited about, because if you get into a Ponzi scheme early, then you're going to make money. And so people just jumped in, of course, until the thing collapses under its own weight, and then he goes to jail. But,
The craziest thing about Pirate 40 was if you looked at his offering statement for his Ponzi scheme, he did it in 2013. And if he literally just fulfilled the Ponzi scheme, it would have been solvent.
Yeah, he would have made money with the price
Because
of Bitcoin.
Bitcoin went from $15 to $1,200 that year. And so if you actually just ran the calculations out and said, if he did what he said he was going to do, you could have done 7% a week over week for that year.
Wow.
And
I
so
never thought
he
about
just
that.
wasn't orange-pilled enough to believe in Bitcoin. And that's why he just took the money and run.
That's a very good point.
Yeah, go ahead, Charlie.
No, a lot of the early scammers in the industry didn't actually believe in Bitcoin, so they would, when the industry self-regulated them out, they would leave.
What's funny is that I didn't believe in Bitcoin. And honestly, I still don't really believe in Bitcoin today, right? Bitcoin continues to prove that it doesn't require belief by continuing to exist. And to the extent, I've always felt that you put faith into these things. Now, of course, this was not a good investment thesis for me, but I think that, again, it's like you look at these faith-based systems, and you don't really need faith-based systems in a world that has cryptography and that has blockchains and stuff like that. And so, I don't think it requires faith, but in terms of as an investment strategy, certainly believing early on that this thing was going to work and then just acting accordingly, that turned out to be a very good strategy indeed.
I think the thing that was just so obvious in everyone was the conviction of values that they had and the desire for change.
Sure.
Because it wasn't until November of 2013, during the Congressional hearing, that each of the alphabet soup organizations explicitly said, being a Bitcoiner isn't a felony. And you could say, well, obviously it's not, looking backward. The half an hour after that statement was made in Congress, Bitcoin went from $400 to $900 during that hearing.
Wow.
And so the market truly believed Bitcoin was going to be stated to be a felony, just being a Bitcoiner. I remember in August of 2013, Congress said, we give the FBI 120 days to give us a report on the legality of Bitcoin.
Could you imagine that? Like, it's a technology. It's, it's insane how,
they're
how
still
it was
doing it
treated
today.
back then. Yeah.
And imagine you're a kid and you tell your bank, I got Bitcoin, and they cancel your bank account. You do a startup and you say, I'm doing Bitcoin, and they cancel your bank account. I had a friend who had lived next to a banker that owned a bank and told him, I'm doing a Bitcoin startup, and that banker canceled his personal bank account just for being a person with a Bitcoin startup.
They'll cancel all the signers on your account. They'll cancel family members' accounts and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah.
I had a guy that worked for me as a CFO, and he was a signer on something like 17 accounts because he's a CFO for part-time for a bunch of different companies. And they closed every single one of those companies' accounts.
Wow.
Because he was doing crypto.
Yeah.
And so in 2013, when all of the writing was on the wall that I was right, the government was wrong, and they were going to make what I was doing illegal, my response to the FBI investigating the community, and if you're in New York, that's where the FBI is going to be investigating, was I said, okay, we have 120 days before this thing's a felony. How do we make sure that Bitcoin doesn't care?
Okay.
And so my friends and I decided that every Monday in Union Square, we would buy and sell Bitcoin in person. And the thought was, for 5,000 years, we've had this social experiment called government, and they've never been able to stop two people meeting in the park and doing whatever the hell they want. And so irrespective of whether or not they made it illegal, we would still be at this park every Monday buying and selling Bitcoin. And it got to the point where there were 20 of them around the world. They were called Satoshi Squares. And like people who now own exchanges became OTC traders because they went to those meetings.
It's true. That's where you learned how to become an OTC trader. I sold Fred Wilson from Union Square Ventures his Bitcoin at Satoshi Square.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. The thing is, the regulatory uncertainty that existed for a long time was probably as detrimental as had they made it illegal. I mean, you couldn't go to a bank and open an account if there wasn't clarity. So the bank would Google it, they'd see bad things, they'd see, and they'd go, well, is this legal? And you'd be like, it's not illegal, kind of.
not yet.
We were the disenfranchised ones, not just personally, but as a business.
Well,
and here we were.
I think we were worse than that in 2013. They would go, is this illegal? And you go, in 1913, the Federal Reserve.
We're so anarcho-capitalist back then. I had all Murray Rothbard and everything spewing out, and the bankers just trying to open up an account for wire transfers or whatever.
But you mentioned the old days before it shifted into this real drive for competition and profit and everything. And it was amazing because everybody was just interested in growing this emerging technology. And nobody talked about, if Bitcoin goes to 500, we'll all be rich. And never. It was always, oh man, imagine if people could send $200 to their family in Ecuador for 3 cents. That was the topic. And it was always about growing it. It was never about making money, ever, which was weird because it was money.
Here's an interesting thing. It's great that you bring that up. And because I think a lot of early people, a lot of Bitcoin core developers just don't have a lot of Bitcoin for that reason. They never bought because
I invested.
I think a lot of people, I really believed Bitcoin was going to be this great technology, but I thought the value was going to be I almost was a little bit angry at Satoshi for naming Bitcoin and Bitcoin the same thing. Yeah. The currency and the system. I was more interested in the system here. I always thought that in the future, you would just have, it would be the value that people would have, it would be between each other. So if I need to send you a transaction, we use Bitcoin, but the value between us, we can define where that value came from. Exchanges existed just to get Bitcoin into people's hands, not at a price.
I mean, what's ironic kind of about the early days is that it was so non-commercial, actually, right? It's it really was a technology that was being adopted purely because it was useful to people who were disenfranchised by the existing system. And you look at, the types of people who that was, and on the one side, you had people, who were users of Silk Road, right? And they're, whether or not it's illegal, they're disenfranchised by the system, right? And then on the other side, you've got libertarians who understand how money works, and they're disenfranchised because the money ain't gonna work the way that they want. So they basically, found this money that did work the way that they want, and it was that. But I mean, that really was the early ethos. The point of owning Bitcoin wasn't that it was going to be worth all of this money. It was that this is useful, and the opportunity to build businesses, again, using that to, technology at its best takes things that are impossible and it makes them possible. But the information about that change is not evenly distributed and not quickly given out. And so it's the early opportunists who are disenfranchised who tend to come into the space, see those opportunities and grab it. And again, we're sitting up here with 3 people who that characterizes entirely. So, I mean, anyways, I'm sorry. That's me going off on a little bit of a memory lane there.
Right,
exactly.
right.
But, I mean, as the industry has matured, and as we have seen, I would argue there's still a lot of lack of clarity, and, very intentionally so, but there's more clarity now. And we have publicly traded companies that, are invested in Bitcoin. We have publicly traded companies that mine Bitcoin. We have publicly traded companies that exchange Bitcoin, right? So we're starting to kind of, I like to say we've been working our way down this road to boring, right? Where it stops being this exciting revolutionary thing and it's just the way that things are. So I mean, talk to kind of what's changed, what's better, what's worse? Just generally how, when you look at the space today and contrast it against the environment that we were operating in all those years ago, where are we?
I think the saddest thing that has happened in the past 10 years is there was so much belief and energy behind the entrepreneurial spirit of America and being American and being in America. And so much of that has been gutted. So much of that has left New York and then left America. And it hurts to think that so much of this is American innovation and American talent that can't be American in order to succeed in this industry. And that to me is something that I think is the saddest part of the past 10 years.
Charlie?
What do you think, Jered?
I mean,
I got to think about my answer.
I was actually going to say the same thing. I'm a little upset I didn't go first. Yeah, exactly. It's the regulatory uncertainty allowed that. And you had so many of these companies and technologies that were created here in the United States. And then people had to leave. And they're like, oh, I'll go to Australia, I'll go to Europe, I'll go to the US is and if you look at, for example, what the SEC is doing with different companies, it's killing it. And the US had this massive advantage. And as an American, I would have liked to see the United States dominate the space. And instead, we're trailing, horribly trailing.
Yeah. And we're not trailing because we're losing. We're trailing because the Americans that are doing it aren't doing it in America.
Right.
You're right.
Right. I mean, that's, I think, a great challenge. Again, like one of the things, of course, about Bitcoin that really kind of characterizes certainly my interest in it is that it's an unstoppable form of money, right? Like blockchains are a good way to track who owns what stuff on the internet, and Bitcoin uses blockchains as a way to track who owns what money on the internet. And having internet native money is incredibly powerful, but really it's the neutrality that's inherent to Bitcoin, right? And the Bitcoin network, lowercase or uppercase B, that kind of characterizes that. And that's something where, again, if you're the United States, I continue to think that we have a battle that's still to come. And so let's talk about that for a second. Let's talk about, again, like what, for everything that's happened, what still needs to happen for this really to stop being a thing where we think about Coinbase as, a crypto company, and it's just a company. And this is a normal business to be in that you don't even need to characterize as crypto, because crypto basically is, perhaps not everything, but has changed the way that we view ownership and changed the way that we view many of these things. I appreciate this is a really big question, but
it's already happening and it's inevitable. You don't talk about web companies anymore.
Right, exactly.
That used to be a term. No, I think it just takes time. It just has to be normal.
Yeah,
and it's getting there.
There are kids born today. There were kids that are 9 years old, 10 years old that didn't live in a world without Bitcoin. So you're talking about how can we say to them, like, does Bitcoin exist or not, or does crypto exist? It's like it is existence. It's part of their whole lives. So I agree. It's definitely just time. I honestly didn't think it was going to happen this fast. I honestly didn't think it was gonna get this big this quickly. We'd be here today. I didn't think that you'd be exporting tonic water, running DLTx. I didn't know we'd all be here today, and that's really such a beautiful thing too. So I'm very grateful for that.
I think the other thing that we didn't appreciate was that for us, when it was like a $300 million market cap, that was insane.
Yeah.
When it hit dollar parity and it was dollar Bitcoin, we all celebrated. It was nuts. Then when it hit pi, 3.14 later, we went nuts, which was pretty quick. But even when it was at hundreds of millions, that's nothing for the banking industry.
Right.
And even today, the banks, it's not even late for the banks. They can still get in. So I think we thought we had a better defense against the banks. We thought it would get so big they wouldn't touch it, and we're still not so big it can't be touched by the banks.
It's moving fast.
I always thought too it would be more of a transcending. So I forgot someone who was like at a Free State event in New Hampshire said, Charlie, let's not end the Fed, let's transcend the Fed, create a better one. And we're all like, as if the Federal Reserve decided to put the money printer on autopilot and walk away for 30 years. And I was like, that sounds great.
Yeah.
Look, gas was, in January 6, 2021, gas was $2.25. Now it's over $5. I hate to say it, but early Bitcoiners were right. The central bankers are screwing up our economy.
Well,
yeah. Hey, I like that guy.
I think another thing that's worth mentioning that to me I love seeing is, so people talk about the highest highs, and I like to think of what's the last time we hit a lowest low, right? In terms of price. But also in terms of understanding of the ecosystem, when is the last time someone getting into Bitcoin asked you a question, right? And so for me, remember how much we had to talk about algorithmic monetary theory and how the concept of predictable payments would blow people's minds. And I like to say, like, in the beginning of the internet, you used to say the word information superhighway.
Right.
Because a connected network wouldn't something they couldn't understand, but a highway they could. Right. And it's like, when was the last time you heard information superhighway?
Right.
And it's those victories that you win, where it's when's the last time that question was something a new person asked you? And the general consciousness is actually growing with you. And I think the most shocking thing in the past 10 years is, as you think back to the questions that you were asked 10 years ago, all of the entry-level questions that aren't even asked anymore, because general consciousness has actually grown so far. Yeah. For the love of God, you watch CNN and they say the word fiat.
That's
when they talk about the dollar.
I know.
That's our legacy right there.
That is.
Financial literacy and people caring. 10 years ago, no one cared about Federal Reserve meeting minutes and inflation rates and all these things. Granted, we didn't have inflation like we have now, but it was a very different world.
I used to bet people $5 that the dollar said Federal Reserve note on it, that it was a debt instrument and it wasn't a dollar. And they're like, no, it doesn't. I'm like, it's literally on the face of the paper.
Okay, so unfortunately, we are almost out of time. We needed about an hour and a half for this conversation, not about 4 years. But, but okay, so you don't have to answer this because I'm putting you on the spot. But each of you, again, like one of the things about the early space to me that I thought was really interesting was seeing all of the crazy jerry-rigged projects, the workarounds, the bridges, the Sam Bankman-Fried's, taking backpacks of cash across the border, to deposit into an exchange to get some arbitrage returns. I mean, like, what kind of stands out to you as something, or perhaps the most audacious, if you can think of it?
Just like one little stupid thing or
Just
big
like,
project?
It's your choice.
I shloved 80,000 in cash into an ATM one time.
Okay.
That was like, just because the bank wasn't open and I had to get the money in and I had to wire it. Yeah.
How'd that go?
It's fine. I was I expected to hear something, but apparently you can shove $80,000 in 20s into an ATM, and it will fit, and
takes
no one
and a
cares
half, but
about that long. Yeah.
My first Bitcoin scam was the pet scam. Someone was using BitInstant to let people buy fake exotic animals for Bitcoin, and he never delivered their Bitcoin. So I was getting calls like, "Where's my mini fox?" and stuff like that. And I'm like, 20 years old, running this company out of New York City, trying to do Bitcoin transactions.
I guess if I had to go for a crazy moment, I remember being a junior in college, and I was taking an accounting course, and I had this horrible professor who just thought that he could curve anything.
Okay.
And so we took the accounting midterm, and every single person got like a C-, and he's like, "Don't worry, it's basically an A. I'm gonna curve it later." And I remember getting this horrible grade on Accounting 101 and being like, "Oh my God, this is so stupid. I know accounting. This professor's just horrible." At the same time, the multi-billionaire Matthew Mellon was texting me, asking me questions about Bitcoin and how he needed to have dinner with me that day because he had another question about the blockchain. And I was like, this legacy world is just not where I need to spend my consciousness.
The coolest thing is meeting heads of state or people like that, and they know who I am, and that's kind of cool. I never get used to that. People ask me for selfies and stuff. I'll never get used to that. I have a huge imposter syndrome. I'm like, why? I didn't do anything. So it's crazy. I think all of us have that.
I mean,
for sure.
I mean, again, you didn't get into Bitcoin in the early days because you had a lot of other stuff going on, right? You got into it because you were looking to cause some trouble.
I had nothing going on.
That's the thing.
I just wanted friends.
There's no way we would have got those jobs today.
Exactly.
Just because nobody else wanted it.
The competitive
we weren't the best.
ecosystem at the time was
the only.
non-existent. Basically, if you wanted to do something, then you just did it. Again, when I created the podcast that then propelled my career for the last 10 years, there were no other podcasts.
I'm so sad that your last episode's coming up.
We haven't even announced it yet.
Let's talk the oldest running. Oh, sorry. Never mind.
Well, we're announcing it now. Yes, I'm retiring my podcast. But anyways, guys, this has been an incredible conversation. Again, it's been an incredible.
Stick my foot in my mouth. Let me
nobody after us. We can just keep going.
So, I mean, we would keep going if it let us,
now.
but I think we
6, 7.
Tells you how much you go over?
We're over. Okay. Thanks, everybody. This has been an incredible panel.
We'll see you in another 10 years.
We'll see you in another 10 years.
All right.
Good job, guys.